I mentioned before that many of the, there have been a number of surveys and great concern in the last few years of the evangelical community losing a lot of their youth and also their older people. And also I've talked to a number of pastors and elders. And there's been a general erosion in the church basically because they've lost a lot of confidence, it appears, in the first of Genesis as being historically not correct and being the book of Genesis not being historically correct, historically or scientifically. And so we're developing a series on this, and today I'm going to speak on this down at Turkey Hill in more detail, taking Genesis 1 through 11. But this section I just wanted to present to you. It's a little bit in the middle of the thing. It has to do with the flood of Noah. And we all have the same evidence to work with in science and history. It's a question of how the pieces are put together. Let me give you an example. Earlier this week, I went home about 6 o'clock, and there was okay, and then I'll turn it off later. Okay. I'm talking out of the dark here. I went home at 6 o'clock. I think it was earlier this week on Tuesday or so, and headed out from my shop and left there, and came back the next day, and I had a farm setting there with big barns and shed and everything, and it was all gone. Some trees there that are 300 to 500 years old. 2 of them are gone for good, and the other 2 that remain, there's probably only less than a half of them left. Tornado came through. It hit upstream from me, upwind from me. It was bouncing evidently, went down, took out a big barn you can see off of K10, and then it came over, jumped over, and then it hit me and came through. And it did all of its damage, I would estimate, within 4 minutes. And it just sheared like a milling machine went through, and there's a hedgerow down below my property across the railroad and just cut just a slot through it. And lost everything. Unfortunately, I didn't have it insured. But if you looked at the thing now, and if I were a uniformitarian, had a uniformitarian view like they do in geology, I'd say, oh, that probably happened over a couple million years, those barns going down and the trees going down and everything, but it only happened in a few, you could actually measure in seconds the amount of time, because this thing was traveling at about 60 miles an hour, they estimate. The things we have in looking around here about us, we totally ignore and take the public education, the general culture. Science takes a different concept of our geology and the world we see. I'd like to present a different one that conforms a lot more to the biblical deal and looks, and all the pieces fit a lot better together. The flood of Noah plays a key part in this thing. From the Genesis, in the second day, you have the waters that were separated from the waters above and the waters below, and the firmament is between them. Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. This is in Genesis 1, verse 6. This was as good a picture as I could do with the atmosphere in the heavens there with the waters above and the waters below. These aren't quite high enough. Those are just clouds. Natural realm before the flood, the waters above. Waters above. Thus God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. The atmosphere, take as in firmament, divides the waters below from the waters above. The water canopy, waters above, probably as a water vapor, would surround the earth above the atmosphere. The waters above supplied some of the flood waters. The windows of the heavens were opened in Genesis 7:11 in the flood, as the water canopy collapsed as rain. Effects of the waters above. This is before. Water canopy in the upper atmosphere before the flood. 1, it would have a moderate reflection of solar radiation and moderate greenhouse effect of the water canopy, providing a mild semi-tropical climates for abundant plant and animal life from both poles to the equator. You'd have a uniform temperature climate over the earth, such as Venus. Same temperature at the poles as at the equator. Fossils of all sedimentary layers, except the very recent ones, show uniform global temperatures. In other words, you have the same plants in Antarctica and animals in Antarctica that you have at the equator and that you have at the North Pole. The fossils are the same. They were growing in the same environment. You don't have tropical plants and polar plants. Some other effects. There would be no rain from weather fronts colliding because of no temperature differences and no temperature zones. Genesis 2, verse 5. Also, without temperature differences, there would probably be no strong winds, but very gentle breezes as the days heat up the water, and you have that some today, and it blows inland. Water canopy will protect from strong radiation with less DNA or genetic damage and with longer life for plants and animals. Atmospheric pressure would be higher than today, caused by the additional weight of the waters above. Venus has a heavy canopy, created atmospheric pressure of 90 times higher than the Earth's. In other words, it's almost 1,500 psi on the surface of Venus, and here it's only like 15 psi. So when you add this other water up above, it increases your column, and you'll get higher atmospheric pressures here on the Earth. Giants in animals and plants would exist in the hyperbaric, this is high pressure atmosphere, which would allow for higher body metabolism for large animals and denser air for flight for larger animals. In other words, pterodactyls could fly because they've got more breathing capacity to run and to flap their wings, and they also have more denser air, so they could do it. They couldn't fly in today's atmosphere. It's too light. It's like when you get up, an airplane gets up high enough and it can't fly at all, it just doesn't have enough air to fly on. Particular reptiles and trees, which never stop growing, would reach incredible sizes. The waters below, let's take the waters below. We've talked about the waters above, let's talk the waters below. They're divided into seas and land. The seas before the flood were probably shallow, since the subsurface features of our present oceans indicate that they are exposed to the atmosphere with much lower ocean temperatures. In other words, along the coast, as you go down, not only plants and animal fossils, but also the rocks indicate that they were exposed to the atmosphere. So the ocean levels were a lot lower one time. Seas before the flood were probably covered a much smaller proportion of the Earth's surface. Presently, 70% of the Earth's surface is covered by oceans and seas, with over 50% deeper than 1 mile. Land at the time before the flood. Since the Lord will bring down the mountains in the future because of haughtiness, this is like in Isaiah 54, verse 9, this is frequently, I'm going to bring the mountains down and level them. The original created good earth probably had no mountains or hills. There were two. There was a number of animal and plant life species that the Genesis creation were much more abundant than today, probably 100 times greater as the fossil records indicate. In other words, we've lost 99% of our species that have existed that we know from the fossil records. The land before the flood was watered by subterranean water sources without rain. A mist came up from the ground to water the plants. Do you remember it? Genesis 2:6, it says, for there was no rain in those days, but the earth was watered by a mist that came up from below. Evidently, there was waters that were under pressure. These also supply the fountains of the deep that supplied the other part of the waters. It says the windows of the heavens opened up, the fountains of the deep burst forth. So these two sources supplied our water. And see, if you didn't have temperate zones, you wouldn't have rain anyway. So it had to be watered in some way, and so it was watered. God had set it up with an irrigation system. You don't have to put it in your yards. All plants and animals are according to their kind in the Genesis creation. And this is going to be real important for two reasons. So there is no possibility of flora and fauna species mixing with other species, which would produce an infinite and probably deadly variety of species combinations. Can you imagine a flea with an elephant's trunk on it? He's made every species with distinct characteristics so that they can survive in their particular climate. And he put these barriers of species between them so they can't cross over and end up killing each other, acquiring characteristics that would make it impossible for them to live. The other side of this is these genetic walls of separation between species also make the evolution of new species impossible, especially where a male and female of each species is necessary to propagate a species. In other words, if you have a species is something that cannot breed with another one. So if you want a new species, like the evolutionists say, it goes out, well, it has to have a mate in sexual reproduction, and it has to occur at the same time, at the same place, and they happen to have to be of the same age and mate to perpetuate that species, which becomes impossible. Almost all of the present species on the earth exist in fossils without change. In other words, the things that we have living today exist in fossils, and they're the same as they are today. They're unchanged. There's no intermediate forms. Conversely, some of evolution's most ancient species are alive and unchanged today as living fossils. Trilobites, things they say are the oldest, they still exist today and they look the same. They're unchanged. The species lines are always maintained in the fossils. It's just that a whole bunch of them have disappeared. Giants and animals and plants exist in the fossil records. You know, you've got the mammoths, mastodons, dinosaurs, etc. The hyperbaric pressure, this is the high pressure of the atmospheres caused by the pre-flood water canopy, would allow for higher metabolism of giant plants and animals. Reptiles, this is a repetition, reptiles and trees which never stop growing reach incredible sizes according to fossil records. For instance, crocodiles, they never stop growing. They just get bigger and bigger. Snakes, let them grow, and the longer they are, trees, like my trees. Why are they so big? They've lived so long. And they'll just keep growing. And if you have ideal conditions like this, where they got a lot more oxygen to work with, they'll grow to be... By the way, we cannot support on the earth today land animals much bigger than an elephant, because your size goes up as your cube and your lungs only go up as a square. And that's probably one reason the dinosaurs couldn't, a 40-ton dinosaur couldn't exist afterwards. You bring a whale, it can breathe. Put it out on the land, it'll die. Why? Because it doesn't get enough oxygen even to move around. You have to, there's limitations with our present atmosphere of the size of animals that can exist, and plants too. 99% of all the original species, created species, are extinct today according to the fossil records. Only 1% of the plant and animal species remains today of the original creation. Fossil records in sedimentary rocks indicate that animals and plants in the pre-Noahic flood creation were spread over the whole earth, including Antarctica, and Arctic. Huge coal beds of extinct semi-tropical and tropical plants are found worldwide, even in Antarctica and Arctic regions. The biggest coal beds in the world may be in Antarctica, and they're formed out of tropical plants. And even the concept of a Pangea, one continent, you can't cram them all into the tropical zone. It just doesn't fit. Their whole storyline doesn't fit together, as we're going to see, and we'll see why these things can be true. Many extinct animals, mammoths, mastodons, saber-toothed tigers, bisons, wolves, hippos, camels, etc., of the original creation were frozen in the Arctic region after the flood. Celestial bodies, these are things out beyond. The sun, moon, and stars were immediately visible through a water canopy, the waters above, and the atmosphere, the firmament, after their creation and before the flood. Okay, so you could see these things instantaneously. That would not be possible with a short universe creation with Einstein's speed of light. The region above the atmosphere will support a reasonably large amount of water, creating a water canopy around the earth. Since the water canopy absorbs solar radiation effectively, the warmer temperatures of the canopy would hold a large amount of water. 2, would give the earth a uniform worldwide uniform temperature, and 3, protect life from destructive radiation. The temperatures here, as you go straight up from us, the temperatures drop down at about 5 or 6 miles up to about 70 below. But then as you go on up, they reach 1,300 degrees. You can put a lot of moisture in that thing because it's intercepting the radiation and it keeps it in a vapor form. But it'd be invisible. You could look right through it. However, the water canopy above the earth cannot be too dense. You can't put too much of it because the light from the celestial bodies would be absorbed or reflected by the water canopy and would not allow light to reach the Earth's surface. Sunlight, for instance, is totally absorbed by 3,000 feet of clear water. This is at the equator, leaving a total darkness at 3,000 feet. That's clear water, and it's totally attenuated by the time it gets through 3,000 feet of clear water. You've got a total darkness at 3,000 feet down in the ocean. If light traveled at Einstein's speed, 186,000 miles per second, or 3 times 10 to the 8 meters per second, then the next star would not be visible until 4 years after the creation. And nearly none of the galaxies would be visible today with our telescopes after 6,000 years. They're too many light years away, according to Einstein still. Briefly about the speed of light. Are we looking at an old universe or a new universe? The fixed speed of light, 3 times 10 to the 8th meters per second, the second postulate of Einstein's special relativity, has been a difficulty for biblical believers in a young Earth and universe. If it takes 20 billion years for light from distant galaxies to travel to the Earth at the speed enshrined in Einstein's relativity, then that light had to be emitted 20 billion years ago, or it had to be created in transit. Einstein's special relativity would nearly eliminate a credible young universe possibility. Conversely, it is impossible for the Big Bang theory for the distant galaxies to travel out to their present positions after a Big Bang, even at Einstein's light speed, and then send light back to the Earth in less than 40 to 60 billion years. They've got a big problem. They don't even think about these things. Because no matter can travel faster than the speed of light, even according to their own theory. However, if Maxwell's derivation, and this was done 50 years before Einstein, c, the speed of light is equal to 1 over electric constant times a magnetic constant, is true, and if the electric and magnetic fields become very weak in deep space, far from the electric subatomic particles in celestial bodies, then the speed of light in deep space will approach nearly an infinite speed. The light from Polaris, the North Star, then would have been emitted by the star only days ago, if Maxwell's correct, instead of more than 50 years as commonly held. The light from the most distant galaxies may only be years old instead of tens of billions of years as commonly held. In this case, the universe could be very young. This is his equation. C, that's the speed of light, is equal to 1, and these are electric and magnetic constants. See, everything's made out of matter. Every matter is made out of charges. Okay, and those charges go out into infinite space. Well, as you get away from the Earth or solar system, they get very weak in deep space. So these two numbers on the bottom approach 0. That means your speed of light will go through the ceiling. They're never 0, so it doesn't ever become infinite. Maxwell's derivation of the speed of light, done in the mid-1980s, and contrary to Einstein's 1915 special relativity, means that the speed of light will approach nearly infinite speeds in the weak electromagnetic fields of deep space, far from celestial bodies composed of electric subatomic charges, particles, electrons and protons. Adam and Eve could have seen many of the 7,000 visible stars in today's sky on the 6th day of creation. And we can see the most distant galaxies today with our most powerful telescopes. This is a picture of deep space. This is shot up. We're in a plane, our galaxy, the Milky Way. They shot out with the Hubble perpendicular to this in space, and they only hit one star out here. You can see it in our galaxies. The rest of these are one star in our galaxies. All the rest of these are galaxies. Look at them. You can see them. On the average, they have 100 billion stars, each one of them. But look at them. They get smaller, smaller, and they disappear in the distance. In other words, you're looking at what? A universe that is probably infinite. Is this light new or ancient? Is it Maxwell or Einstein? Is it a new or old universe? Man before the flood. The pre-flood, we call them antediluvian human race, if you want some big words, had longevity of life, an average of over 900 years. This is from Genesis 5 in the genealogies. Many of the antediluvian race are giants. We know this from Genesis 6:4. Probably the product, and this is, I take those passages in 2 Peter and Jude in this sense, and most biblical commentators take them that. Possibly the product, these giants, were the product of fallen angels and the daughters of men. This is Genesis 4 taken with 2 Peter 2:4 and Jude 6. These demigod giants, offspring of men and angels, are probably the basis of the heroes of ancient mythology, Atlas, Hercules, who had one human parent and one God parent. These angels, by the way, were locked up because it said they left their own estate in the same way that they did in Sodom and Gomorrah, going after strange flesh. In contrast to the wickedness of this perverse generation is Enoch, whom God translated before the flood out of his evil generation. This is in Genesis 5:24. Like Elijah after him. Enoch pronounced judgment on his generation. This is in Jude 14 and 15. His rapture and godly life serve as a foreshadowing of the rapture of the church before the great tribulation that will come upon the earth. Noah. Before the flood, the sin of ungodly unions and the sinful actions of the antediluvian race resulted in God's judgment to destroy all land animals, including man, in the whole earth by a worldwide flood. Noah, a preacher of righteousness, is chosen by God to build an ark for the saving of himself, of his family, and of the mates of all the animals and birds on the earth. This flood would kill everything, land animals and birds, of the antediluvian world, and would change the geophysics of the earth and its climate forever. After the flood, God establishes his covenant with Noah and his descendants, all of mankind, and sets up a new dispensation for all mankind, which continues to this day. The new dispensation establishes human government with the right of judgment, including capital punishment. It allows diets to eat for the eating of meat and places the fear of man in animals. Also, the age of man declines exponentially after succeeding generations to 120 years. God's view of the antediluvian mankind. So God looked upon the earth, and indeed it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. This is an ancient civilization that is in the Orient that's fallen into judgment. Trees are just growing up in it. God's coming judgment on the earth. I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping things and birds of the air. This is Genesis 6:7. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. This is in Genesis 6:8. God said to Noah, make an ark. Make yourself an ark. Genesis 6:14. This is Noah and his sons building the ark. He went and preached to the spirits in prison, who formerly were disobedient, when once the divine long-suffering waited in the days of Noah while the ark was being prepared. The people that lived in that time will have no excuse in the final judgment, because Noah was a preacher of righteousness and explained to them what was going to happen. Of course, they're just standing around, they laugh and point at him. Of the clean animals, of the animals that were unclean, of birds, and of everything that creeps on the earth, 2 by 2, they went into the ark to Noah. At this point, there's no fear of man and animals. In the 600th year of Noah's life, on that day, all of the fountains of the deep were broken up, and the windows of the heavens were open. Genesis 7:11. And the windows of the heavens were open. And on that day, all the fountains of the deep were broken up. This is a tsunami, but it would shows you very well what happens if the earth would break open and yield the water that was under it that would have been watering it before. People running for their lives. Now the flood was on the earth 40 days, Genesis 7:17. During the flood, massive tectonic movements triggered worldwide volcanic eruptions. See, as this water runs down to the lower areas, it creates a isostatic situation, pushing it down, and others have to pop up. Well, these create fissures in the Earth's surface. And up through these, volcanoes come. And we've had a huge amount of volcanoes in the past that are all extinct. Every once in a while, one blows off, just like this last month. And it's a minor one, very minor. But during the time of the flood, these things are going to be going off like crazy. The worldwide volcanic eruptions during the flood filled the atmosphere with volcanic ash. The large amounts of volcanic ash in the atmosphere created massive storms during the flood. This over here is a volcano going off, and it creates a huge amount of lightning and things in the storm. And it creates these storms that are rolling around these volcanic eruptions. You had that in even the one in Iceland. There's a tremendous amount of storm activity that took place around it. Worldwide volcanic eruptions under the floodwaters caused earthquakes and tsunamis. This is a very rare picture of actually volcanic eruption out at sea, coming up through and blowing. You can see the water turning to steam and the volcanic stuff being blown up in the air in 2 points at this point. Worldwide volcanic and tectonic and earthquake activity during the flood created massive tsunamis. Massive tsunamis during the flood destroyed and buried animal and plant life. This was in the one that killed about, they don't know how many people, 250,000 to 300,000 not too long ago. These are just small indicators of what can happen. That was not a major tsunami that took those 250,000 people's lives. The waters prevailed 15 cubits upward, and the mountains were covered. And all flesh died that was moved on the earth, birds, and cattle, and beasts, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, and every man. Desperate attempts at the end. The violence of the floodwaters displaced and deposited worldwide geological sedimentary layers by moving water. See these layers here? Those aren't products of millions of years. Those are laid down in a relatively short amount of time, trapping huge amounts of plants and animals in them and forming fossils. Those aren't formed today. And see how tight these layers are here? Deep sedimentary layers full of fossils were deposited by the catastrophic flood waters over the surface of the earth. And these are worldwide sedimentary layers. Deep sedimentary layers were deposited over the earth's surface. Some were cut through by flood waters while still soft. In other words, like the Grand Canyon, it's actually a swell like this, and water built up behind it, forming a big lake, and then it cut through. Well, these weren't cut through millions of years. You can't cut through that rock by modern processes. The Grand Canyon is not being deepened at all today. Deep sedimentary layers were folded without fracturing while still moist and soft by tectonic movement. See this bends of those things? You can't take solid rock and bend it like that. Those were bent while they were still plastic, soft and moist. This is in Australia, but these things were bent up. Look at it all. And you can drive on any of your highways out there, particularly in Colorado on I-70. You can go down south through the Arbuckles and see these bends and folds, whole layers, these gigantic layers, all folded while they were soft. Huge tropical forests were uprooted and deposited by the floodwaters, forming massive alluvial, here's coal beds, over the whole earth. The fountains of the deep and the windows of the heavens were also stopped. This is when the flood reaches its peak. And the rains from heavens were restrained, and the waters receded continually from the earth. Then the ark rested on the mountains of Ararat. Noah looked, and indeed the surface of the earth was dried. He remained in that thing for about 150 days or more. The reason is because all this stuff was mud and stuff, and you just can't walk out on it until it dries. You just disappear down through it. So he had to wait on the ark for a long time while the water drained out of the earth around there. The Lord spoke to Noah, saying, "Get out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons' wives with you. Bring out with you every living thing of all flesh." This ark, by the way, is enormous. Everyone thinks, oh, there's a dinky thing. You always see it with the giraffe's head sticking out and everything. The giraffe can stand on there, and he can't stick his head out the top of the thing by any stretch. The Noahic covenant. I established my covenant with you and your descendants. Who are his descendants? All mankind. The line of Adam has been narrowed down to Noah's line. And all of the people come from that, all races. By the way, there's another deal I have to do on the Tower of Babel. Shem and all of Shem lived into the time of Noah, till Noah was about 100 years old. All of Shem and his descendants were there shortly after the flood at the Tower of Babel, all speaking one language. And God divided their languages, and they spread out over the earth. So all of us are related. There's no basis for racism as a consequence. And God designed our languages to split us up. But we're all genetically linked, and now the modern genetics shows that. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord and offered burnt offerings on the altar. Remember, he took 7 of the clean animals? Why? So he'd have some for sacrifice without eliminating their race. I set my rainbow in the cloud, and it shall be the sign of the covenant between me and the earth. After the flood, volcanoes continued to push up new land masses and mountains. Volcanic islands were pushed up in the oceans filled with the warm waters after the flood, like the Hawaiian Islands are the largest mountains in the world. They're 30,000 feet under and 10,000 feet up, some of them 40,000 feet high. After the flood, volcanoes continued to bring valuable minerals and igneous rock to the Earth's surface. That's where your gold and copper and all these things come from that we have to work with. Without a water canopy, the waters above, the post-flood world developed temperature zones with cold temperatures at its poles, and it developed warm temperatures at its equator. After the flood, massive volcanoes continued to they were caused by the flood tectonics, ominously continued to spill ash into the atmosphere. They didn't stop immediately. Volcanic ash from these massive eruptions filled the whole Earth's post-flood atmosphere. Volcanic clouds blocked solar radiation and rapidly cooled the atmosphere to very cold temperatures. Cold atmospheric temperatures and massive volcanic eruptions triggered huge storms, especially in the new polar regions. These were just appearing. You see, this is the snow and everything, and see the lightning again around these volcanic deals, pumping this stuff up in there, and it's going to continue to block the solar radiation. In these new cold polar regions, these huge storms turn dramatically into snow blizzards. Volcanoes, warm ocean moisture. See, the oceans are still warm, and they're pumping this atmosphere up, this moisture in the atmosphere, and then these temperatures are dropping dramatically at the poles, and cold air temperatures fuel these massive polar snow blizzards day and night. Blizzards blanketed the polar landscape with massive amounts of snow day and night. Huge mammoths and other extinct animals feeding on the semi-tropical grasslands in northern Siberia were trapped by the floodwaters, that's at the time of Noah, and then afterwards by the floods, the post-flood snows. Millions of pre-flood animals perished in the flood and were frozen by the post-flood snows. Here are some frozen remains of a mammoth in Siberia, which was partially eaten by wolves after partial thawing. This is taxidermy remains of the same mammoth from Siberia. Fierce polar snow blizzards begin to cover up the newly formed mountains and to fill the valleys. Snow soon covered most of the newly formed mountains in the polar regions. Fed by moisture from the large, warm oceans, the polar blizzards continued unabated. Descendants of Noah were driven back by the blizzards to the warmest part of the earth near Babylon. Rapidly, the Ice Age snow covered all of the Earth's polar terrains. The deep snow compacted into Ice Age glaciers, often more than a mile deep. The Ice Age glaciers begin to move, pulled by large snow accumulations and pulled by gravity. These huge glaciers ground up everything in front of them, even the mountains. I don't know if you know it, but here at Lawrence, we sit on the south end of these glaciers. They came from the north. Out by our bridge that crosses the river, there's a huge stone. It's granite, red granite. It came from about 700 or 800 miles north of here, and it weighs probably 15, 20 tons. There's one near my shop, they say, that's big as a house that's still buried. We are in the moraine of these things, and these things push south, so that we had glaciers on top of the place that we're sitting right now, caused by these things. These continental-sized glaciers changed all the terrain, moving glacial materials hundreds of miles. Moisture to produce the intense, brief Ice Age snow and glaciers came from warm oceans, which lost 300 to 500 feet of their depth. As the volcanoes stopped and the atmosphere began to warm up again, the volcanoes shut down, and then the air starts to warm up. We've just had there's just one volcano not too long ago, even 30 or 40 years ago, that was in the Philippines, and that single volcano lowered the temperature of the earth 2 to 3 degrees. You can imagine if you got a bunch of them going off, and especially if you have these no longer have the water canopy to spread the temperatures, it's going to get very cold, and these things are just going to, and you got warm oceans pumping it up. That's where this whole came from. But then these things are going to die out. The volcanoes are going to shut down as the things stabilize. And these things begin to melt. The glaciers begin to melt, creating enormous rivers. The Kansas River, the Missouri River, Mississippi River, those valleys were all not cut by the rivers that we've got now. They're cut by huge amounts of flow of water that ran from bluff to bluff and cut those things out. In fact, they even cut, we know from our borings, they've even cut into what we'd consider bedrock. There's a valley cut down through there, creating enormous rivers as these things begin to melt and recede. Great rivers created by the melting glaciers return the snowmelt water to the oceans. The melting Ice Age glaciers left a strange landscape and glacial deposits in their wake. The receding glaciers left sedimentary, igneous, and metamorphic rock, fossils, minerals, and glacial deposits past the 38th parallel toward the equator. Huge tropical forests uprooted and deposited by the floodwaters formed massive alluvial, that means laid down by water, coal beds and oil fields like these for the Earth's energy sources. In other words, we're pumping off the effects and we're burning coal off the effects of the flood. The plants, by the way, that make these up, a lot of them are what we call lycopods. They don't exist anymore, but huge amounts. And they were buried suddenly, and as you can see, the seams are very sharp. These are not bogs or bottoms of lakes. These things were ripped loose. The roots are up in here. They're not down here. There's no roots down below these things. These weren't buried in place. They were ripped loose from wherever they were growing and laid down and deposited and then crushed. Deep sedimentary layers over the whole earth were deposited, folded, and cut through by huge floodwaters while still soft. Massive alluvial layers from the Noahic flood and the glacial ice age are the basic building materials for modern civilization. Here you have your rock, like Ron and those guys work, and here you have mine, It comes out of the alluvial afterwards, sand deposits. Science and its laws harmonize with the biblical creation, the fall of man, and the Noahic flood. Basic laws of science originated in what? Genesis 1 through 3. Conservation of matter and energy. In Genesis, in the creation, it's the law of creation. And the law of increasing disorder in matter and energy, the second law, comes out of the fall. Basic laws come out of there. Ask where did these laws come from? Science people. And they're at loss for it. Where did matter and energy come from? How did the universe get ordered? There's no explanations for any of this stuff. Physics of science of light speed supports the biblical account of a young universe. Geological records agree with the biblical account of the pre-flood earth conditions, climatic, environmental, geophysical, and biological. Fossil records confirm the biblical account of pre-flood plants and animals. Sedimentary, igneous, and metamorphic formations affirm the biblical account of a catastrophic worldwide flood and the post-flood ice age. Recent floods, volcanoes, eruptions, tsunamis, and earthquakes confirm on a small scale the effects of a biblical worldwide flood. Glacial deposits verify the biblical post-flood ice age. Modern physics, geology, astronomy, and biology of secular naturalism cannot explain the origins or the present conditions of the earth, universe, and life. Scientific laws and data confirm God's creation of the universe and the catastrophic worldwide results of God's judgment on the world, contrary to naturalism's science. What I wanted to do today was just give you an alternative view using the biblical accounts that really we're looking at a universe that's not billions of years old. We're not looking at the evolutionary process of life that's almost 1 billion years old, hundreds of millions. We're looking at something that's very short. And I think a lot of this is because there's a denial that when you drive out on this road and go through these cuts, what you're looking at, those rock deals, is a catastrophe. Animals that were and plants that were destroyed in a very short amount of time, covered up, which doesn't happen today. You can go out there and there's no fossils in these flood waters. Nothing's trapped. These things weren't slow process, they were catastrophic. And it's a reminder, like 2 Peter says, they deny these judgments of the past, whether with the angels, whether the floods, or whether Sodom and Gomorrah. God's made statements and he left them there as reminders to us so that the world's without excuse. They can't say, oh, we don't know this. They've reinterpreted it all and tried to make it act like it's all normal. It's long, slow processes. It's just like me out there. Those trees sat there for 300 or 400 years. And all of a sudden, in 4 minutes, they're ripped to shreds. And then I've got to pick up the pieces. And what we're looking at here is most of our world is formed in less than a year's time, that we can see the geology, the mining deals that we have, even the minerals coming up out of the earth, were all given to us. It's not like the world that Noah grew up in, that came from Adam. It's an entirely different world. And God's changed those. And we have to take into account, these are forerunners of what lies ahead. Do you know the situation with the judgments that lie ahead? I'm just going through Revelation. Those are frightening. And they're very comparable to what's taken place, because the next one, even the elements will burn with fire, and the whole universe will blow up. And it'll be much more catastrophic. The world we live in is not here for permanence. It's for a world to come and give us a hope in that. And that's why our salvation is so important. It's going to save us out of this. And Peter says, and Jude says, it shows by taking Noah out of the deal and taking Lot out, that God knows how to save the righteous and to deliver the unrighteous into judgment. They were eating and drinking and making merry until the flood came upon them, Jesus said. And they were all gone. Let us take it as a warning. And how should we then live, 2 Peter says? He says, righteously and godly in this day and age, because we have a hope that's coming. Let's pray. Father, we just thank you that you've given us the scripture so we know what really happened. It's not fantasies created by our naturalistic minds, but these are real events. This was real history. You transformed the world, you brought it into judgment, and you're going to do it again in the future. And we pray that we live in this age that you've given us, like Noah, like Enoch, like Lot. Even though our souls may be tortured, there will be people of righteousness, and we'll be preachers of righteousness in this day and age as the time comes. That we will pass away, but there will be a new heavens and a new earth, and we'll be given new bodies to live there in a face-to-face relationship with you, not ashamed because our sins have been taken away. We just thank you for this hope that Jesus has supplied to redeem us from this world that's on a course of destruction and under your judgment, that you'll deliver us out of it. Just thank you for this. In Jesus' name, amen.